My name is Connie. I am 58 years old. For 33 of those years, my proudest title was Mum. I remember the specific weight of my daughter Caroline asleep on my chest, the particular sweet smell of baby shampoo lingering in her fine brown curls, and the clear sound of her laughter echoing through our kitchen as she helped me stir cookie dough. I built the entire architecture of my life around her, especially after her father Michael passed when she was just 10. We became a team of two, just us against the world. All my private hopes and quiet dreams were tied up in watching her become a kind, grounded, capable woman. When she got into that prestigious university back east, it felt like the ultimate reward for every silent sacrifice, every missed date, every overtime hour. But now, sitting in her perfectly cold, grey dining room in the city, waiting for a family meeting, she called with such formal purpose, a deep chill settles in my bones that has nothing to do with the air conditioning. I feel like a visitor in my own child's story, a character who has wandered onto the wrong set. Before I share what happened in that room, a moment that shattered one understanding of family and painfully forged another, I want to know where in the world you are listening from today. If you have ever sat in a quiet, unfamiliar room and felt the solid ground of a relationship you trusted beginning to crack and shift beneath you, let me know you are here. Take a second to hit that subscribe button. What I learned in the silence that followed might just remind you of a strength you forgot. You had a voice you thought you had lost. The family meeting felt more like a corporate board review than a conversation between a mother and her daughter. Caroline, my only child, now 32, and a corporate lawyer whose words were always precise and often carried a subtle edge, sat at the head of her sleek glass table as if it were a throne. Her husband David was stationed beside her, his posture impeccably straight, his smile polite, but never quite reaching his calm, assessing eyes. And then there was Maya, Caroline's best friend since the 7th grade, who I had fed 1,000 times at my own kitchen table, who had slept over countless weekends. Her presence in this formal gathering felt odd, jarringly out of place in what was supposed to be a family discussion. The entire condo was a study in cool minimalism. Stark whites, sharp metallic angles, abstract art that looked expensive, but felt emotionally empty. It was the polar opposite of my warm, cluttered, lovingly worn house, with its overstuffed bookshelves, walls covered in framed photos, and children's drawings gone yellow with age and furniture, chosen for comfort over style. Caroline began speaking, her voice smooth and practiced, like she was opening a quarterly earnings call. "Mum, we asked you here today because we want to have a transparent talk about the future, our collective future and yours." She offered a smile, but it was the kind of thin, professional smile I imagined she used when presenting a difficult clause to a client. "First, we want to acknowledge you, to thank you, for everything. We know how hard you worked, all you gave up." The words were technically correct, but they landed with the hollow thud of stones dropped into a deep well. David nodded in solemn agreement. "Absolutely, Connie. We've been doing a lot of strategic planning lately, looking at long-term investments, property portfolios. We want to build a solid, multi-generational foundation for us and for the children we hope to have one day." A tiny cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. "That sounds responsible," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone that I did not feel my fingers tracing the cool edge of the glass table. Caroline leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table, fingers steepled. "It is. And part of that comprehensive planning involves taking a clear-eyed look at all our family assets, being smart, not sentimental." She paused, a calculated beat for effect. "Mum, your house. It represents a significant part of that equation." The air in the room seemed to grow thinner, harder to breathe. "My house," I asked as if I might have misheard. "It's a tremendous asset. David chimed in, his voice a steady drone of reason. Fully paid off, which is excellent. But it's also a lot of physical and financial upkeep for one person. The property taxes alone keep climbing. The roof is 20 years old. The garden is a full-time job. From a pure numbers perspective, it's a static asset, not optimized for growth or for your current lifestyle needs. Optimized. I echoed the word, feeling strange and sterile on my tongue. For your security and your freedom in retirement. Caroline clarified her tone, adopting a patient explaining things to a child cadence. We're thinking about your well-being. Imagine not having to worry about a leaky roof or mowing that huge lawn in the August heat. Imagine having someone else handle all the maintenance while your money works harder for you. I looked past her, seeking Maya's face, hoping for a flicker of the familiar grounding girl I knew. She was intently studying the intricate pattern on her delicate china plate, refusing to meet my gaze. I tried to deflect with a piece of my soul. But the garden, Caroline. Your father planted that sugar maple tree in the backyard for your 10th birthday party. You helped him water it. The rose bushes along the fence. He planted a new one for every anniversary until the peonies that come back every spring. The ones you used to make fairy crowns from. Caroline's polite smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. I remember, Mum. I do. But sentiment doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't secure a future. We're talking about practicality, about leveraging dormant equity to create a better, easier, more secure life for you. This is what family does. They help each other move forward. The conversation swirled around me for another 20 minutes. A torrent of phrases like liquidity event, right-sizing, and managed care community. I contributed little, just faint nods and non-committal murmurs. The home I had lived in for 35 years, the place where I had scattered Michael's ashes beneath his favourite rosebush, the walls that held every echo of Caroline's childhood laughter and teenage tears had been reduced in their eyes to a column in a spreadsheet. A problem to be solved, an obstacle to their progress. When I finally left, their goodbyes were cheerful, their hugs brief, but the invasive chill from the dining room had seeped deep into my core and taken root. In the weeks that followed their initial proposal, the gentle, persistent suggestions transformed into a steady, polite siege. It was a campaign of death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to dismiss individually, but collectively, they were bleeding me dry of confidence and autonomy. David just happened to have a friend in commercial real estate who could swing by as a favor and give me a no-obligation market assessment. A relentlessly cheerful woman named Stacy arrived in a sleek suit, clicking her low heels on my original hardwood floors, talking briskly about square footage premiums and comparable teardowns in the area, while I silently traced the familiar scuff marks on that floor from Caroline's roller skates and the long-gone family dog's claws. Then came the senior lifestyle transition consultant, a very kind, gentle-voiced man named Greg, sent directly by Caroline. His mission was to help me curate my lifetime of possessions and plan for a seamless, stress-free transition to a simplified lifestyle. He held up a chipped ceramic mug that said "World's Best Mum" in faded child-drawn letters. "Does this item spark joy for you moving forward?" he asked with sincere empathy. I took it from his hands, feeling the familiar crack in the handle, and placed it firmly back in the cabinet. "This item stays," I said, my voice firmer than I felt inside. "It's not about joy. It's about history." Every time I pushed back, erected a small boundary, the response was a well-rehearsed variation on a theme. "We just worry about you out here all alone, Mum. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Try to see the bigger, long-term picture here." It was like being slowly, methodically wrapped in invisible, suffocating gauze. My concerns, my fears, my attachments were not being engaged with. They were being diagnosed as symptoms of my stubbornness, my aging sentimentality. my inability to adapt. One rainy afternoon, fighting a rising wave of helpless anger and profound sadness, I pulled a heavy cloth-covered album from the bottom shelf of the living room bookcase. The photos inside were fading. One caught my breath. Caroline at 14, her smile a glittering landscape of shiny new braces. I had worked a second job as a nighttime bookstore clerk for 22 months to pay for them. The memory was so vivid, it was tactile, her coming home from the orthodontist, face-pale tears brimming from the deep, aching pressure. She had thrown her thin arms around my waist, burying her face in my shoulder. "It hurts so much, Mum." "I know, sweetheart. It'll ease up. I'll pay you back for all this someday, I promise. Every penny." I had laughed softly, kissed the top of her head, smelling her strawberry shampoo. "You just have a beautiful, healthy smile. That's all the payment I ever need." The contrast between that vulnerable, grateful girl and the poised, cold woman, now discussing the monetization of my home, with the detached air of an asset stripper, was a physical ache, a nausea that rose in my throat. The final, most intimate betrayal came from an entirely unexpected direction. I ran into an old neighbor, Linda, in the pasta aisle at the grocery store. After catching up on her grandchildren and my garden, her expression shifted to one of awkward sympathy. "I heard from Beth, who heard from Sarah at the book club, that Maya is working formally with Caroline on some big financial overhaul, life and legacy strategy stuff. Sarah said Caroline's actually paying her a monthly consultant fee." She must have seen the color drain completely from my face. "Oh, honey," Linda whispered, reaching for my arm. "You didn't know." I drove home in a thick daze, the familiar streets blurring. Maya, the girl I had driven to countless soccer games and school plays, who had cried on my shoulder after her first real heartbreak, who called me Mum too. She was now a paid advisor, a mercenary in the calculated campaign to dismantle my life. The sterile corporate language they used, asset reallocation, managed care portfolio, legacy optimization, now snapped into a grotesque, clear focus. This was not family planning. This was a hostile takeover bid. And Iconi was the aging, underperforming company they had decided to liquidate for parts. They came for dinner at my house the following month, clinging to the thin veneer of a normal tradition. Caroline brought a beautifully wrapped bourbon pecan bundt cake from that fancy bakery downtown. David brought the leather-bound folder. We made it through the meal, the conversation flowing like cold mud. I talked about the new family of cardinals at the bird feeder and the aggressive squirrel I'd named Bertram. David talked about bond yield curves and market volatility. Caroline checked her phone intermittently, responding to emails with quick, decisive taps. After we cleared the plates, she did not offer to help with the dishes, as she once would have. Instead, she gave David a small, almost imperceptible nod. He opened the folder with a deliberate slowness and slid a glossy, full-color brochure across the table toward me. "Silver Springs Senior Living Community," it read in elegant, friendly script. The photos showed vibrantly healthy, smiling, white-haired couples playing bocce ball on manicured lawns, holding hands in sunny courtyards, and dining in a bright cafeteria-style hall. "Mum," Caroline began, her voice taking on that firm, closing argument tone I had come to dread. It signaled that the period of discussion was over and the time for decision had arrived. "We've found a solution, a truly wonderful, comprehensive solution." David tapped a printed page in the folder. It was a letter of intent, not a formal contract, but it bore the logo of Greenleaf Developments. "We've been in preliminary talks with Greenleaf," he said. "They are very, very interested in this entire lot, your house and the 2 vacant lots beside it. They have a vision for a high-density townhome community here. The offer on the table is substantial, well above current market value given the development potential." The words did not feel like words. They felt like physical blows, each one landing in my stomach. Talks, I managed to whisper, my voice thin. You've been in talks about selling my home without me. For your ultimate benefit, Caroline interjected swiftly, her hand coming up in a placating gesture that felt anything but calming. Just listen to the math, Mum. With the proceeds from the sale, we could invest conservatively in a balanced income fund. The projected returns, combined with your social security and your small pension, would not only cover a beautiful, spacious, maintenance-free apartment at Silver Springs, but would also provide you with a generous monthly discretionary allowance. We would handle all the management, the taxes, the paperwork. You'd have a truly carefree life. No more worries about pipes freezing or property taxes rising. Isn't that what you want? I looked from her determined, impatient face to David's placid, confident one. This is my home, I whispered. Then the words found volume and strength from a deep, wounded place. This is where your father proposed to me on the back porch during a thunderstorm. This is where you took your first steps, holding onto the leg of that coffee table. This is where I sat up with you all night when you had the croup. This is where I scattered his ashes under his favorite rose bush. You want to sell it to a developer to be bulldozed and turned into anonymous townhomes. Caroline sighed, a heavy sound of profound exasperation, as if I were a slow student failing to grasp a simple concept. Mum, please. You're clinging to dust and memories. This isn't about the past. This is about the future. Our future. We want to buy a place at Silver Lake, start a serious college fund for the children we hope to have. This is how modern families help each other move forward. We pool resources. We make strategic decisions for the collective good. By erasing my past, my hands resting on the table had begun to tremble visibly. By boxing me up and depositing me in a rented beige apartment so you can have a vacation home on a lake, I gave up. Everything. For you. I worked 2 jobs for years. I went without. I never even considered remarrying because I wanted all my focus to be on you. I made sure you had every single opportunity I never had. She cut me off, her voice sharpening into a blade. That was your choice, Mum. You don't get to hold that over me forever. You made those sacrifices, and I am grateful. But I do not owe you my entire future in return. This isn't about guilt. This is about being practical. This is about not being a burden as you age. The word exploded in the small space of my kitchen, toxic and final. Burden. It echoed off the cabinets her father had installed. I stared at my daughter, and in that moment, the last fragile veil of motherhood dissolved. I did not see my little girl. I saw a stranger, a strategic ally of her husband, who viewed my love, my life's work, my history as an inconvenient debt on their personal balance sheet, a line item to be cleared. David finally spoke into the charged silence, his voice the calm of a negotiator. Just think about it, Connie. Sleep on it. It's a very generous offer. We all just need you to be reasonable. I said nothing more. I simply looked from the brochure of the smiling, anonymous elderly strangers to the rain-streaked window, to the silhouette of the maple tree. Her father planted its leaves just beginning to blush with the first hint of autumn fire. The silence in my familiar, beloved kitchen was the loudest, most desolate sound I had ever heard. The climactic confrontation at the restaurant was not of my making, at least not by my design. It was Caroline's 33rd birthday dinner at the Grove, one of those new establishments where the lighting was so dim you had to squint at the menu, and the plates were so large the tiny portions looked lost in the center. She had invited a wide, impressive circle, sharp-eyed colleagues from her high-powered law firm, trendy, ambitious friends from the city, and a smattering of family, including my sharp-tongued, fiercely observant 80-year-old Aunt Ruth. I felt conspicuously, painfully out of place in my simple, decade-old blue dress, amid a sea of black designer silk-tailored suits and statement jewelry. Caroline was radiant, holding court at the long table, the absolute picture of cultivated success. The toasts began. Her law partner praised her ruthless intellect and unassailable logic. David gave a bland, generic speech about shared dreams and building empires. Each word felt like another layer of glossy varnish being applied to a new, polished version of my daughter, a sculpture I admired but could no longer recognize. Then, during a lull between courses, one of Caroline's friends from college, a woman named Chloe, asked about their summer plans. Caroline, her cheeks flushed from several glasses of expensive Pinot Noir, saw a public relations opportunity. She decided to use my situation as a showcase of her problem-solving prowess, her benevolent control. "Our plans are actually bigger than just the summer," she announced, her voice carrying clearly down the long table. A few conversations hushed. "We're in the process of helping my mum transition into a fantastic new chapter of her life." All eyes, like a swarm of attentive insects, swung to me. I froze, a forkful of asparagus hovering halfway to my mouth. She continued, a magnanimous, slightly patronizing smile playing on her lips. "She's been so resistant, bless her heart, just clinging to that big old empty house full of memories. It's charming, really, but it's time. Time for her to listen to reason and let us handle things so she can truly relax and enjoy her golden years." The heat of 100 focused stares hit my face like a physical wave. I set my fork down carefully on the edge of my plate. The faint clink, absurdly loud. "Caroline," I said, my voice low but clear in the sudden quiet. "This isn't the place for this conversation." It was the wrong thing to say. It was a direct challenge to her narrative, to her authority in this room of her peers. Her public smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. She turned her full body toward me, and when she spoke next, her lawyer's voice was crisp cold and projected to be heard by every ear at the table. "See, this is the problem. Right here. You refuse to respect our expertise, our time, our vision for this family's future. You live in the past, Mum. You sit in that house surrounded by dust and memories of a life that's over, and you contribute nothing forward. You're stuck. You're an anchor." She took a step closer to my chair. Her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that was both personal and performative. And she delivered the line she had clearly been rehearsing in her head for months, perhaps, in front of a mirror. She said it with absolute, chilling courtroom clarity. And honestly, a person who chooses to be a burden, who actively refuses to adapt to the realities of life, no longer deserves the respect they simply demand by virtue of existing. "I'm done arguing. I'm done begging you to be reasonable." A collective, sharp gasp seemed to suck all the air and sound from the room. Aunt Ruth's knotted hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. David studied the intricate weave of the white tablecloth, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Maya stared fixedly into her half-full wineglass, a deep, mortified flush creeping up her neck and across her cheeks. Every other face, friends, colleagues, distant cousins, was a frozen mask of shock, acute embarrassment, or unabashed morbid curiosity. The waiters hovering by the kitchen door stopped mid-step. The world compressed, telescoping down to the few feet of expensive carpet between my daughter and me, to the venomous final echo of her words hanging in the perfumed, charged air. I felt it then. A white-hot lance of pain so profound, so total, it threatened to vaporize me on the spot. And then something miraculous and terrifying. As if that searing pain had incinerated everything else inside me. The fear, the desperate need for her approval, the lifelong habit of maternal compromise, the hope that she would see me. It left behind a vast hollow, perfectly calm silence. It was the calm of the deepest ocean trench where no light penetrates, and the pressure would crush anything unprepared. I was prepared. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not wilt or collapse into my chair. I let the awful reverberating silence stretch, feeling its immense weight, knowing with absolute certainty that every single person in that opulent room was holding their breath, waiting for the old emotional mother to crumble into sobs or launch into a tearful defensive tirade. They were braced for a scene. I would not give them one. I slowly, deliberately pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was smooth, controlled. I looked at Caroline, seeing not my child, but the lead attorney who had just rested her case for my irrelevance. Then I let my gaze travel slowly and deliberately across David's lowered, shameful head, across Maya's averted, tear-filled eyes, across the panorama of stunned, frozen guests, and finally it landed on Aunt Ruth. Her eyes, once wide with shock, were now blazing with a fierce, fiery pride that mirrored the cold, diamond-hard clarity I felt within. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, steady, and carried with a quiet authority to every shadowed corner of the frozen room. It was not the trembling voice of a wounded victim. It was the measured, resonant voice of a judge delivering a final, unappealable verdict. "Caroline," I said, and the name itself sounded different now, stripped of its maternal softness. "You are correct. Respect is not a demand one can make. It is not an entitlement of age or relation." I paused, letting the first part of the statement settle into the silence, watching confusion flicker in her eyes. It is a reciprocal agreement, a continuous voluntary exchange between two autonomous individuals. Another beat of silence thicker than before. "And as of this moment, I withdraw my consent from our current arrangement." The sentence did not land with a dramatic bang, but with the chilling, definitive click of a lock sliding home. Confusion on Caroline's face was swiftly replaced by a dawning, unsettling comprehension. The entire power dynamic of the last year, so solid and unquestioned in her mind just 60 seconds ago, was now shimmering, cracking, dissolving like a mirage. What does that even mean?" she stammered, her polished confidence fracturing, revealing the raw uncertainty beneath. "It means the discussion about my home, my life decisions and my personal assets is permanently closed." I stated my tone, even factual, devoid of any emotion but finality. "You are hereby removed from your self-appointed roles. You are no longer my financial advisor, my real estate agent, or my life planner. You are my daughter, and we will now discover in time whether that biological relationship can exist independently on its own terms without the framework of your control or my compliance." I then turned my body slightly to address the room to the sea of astonished faces that seemed to have forgotten how to blink. "Please," I said with a calm that felt superhuman, "do not let this interrupt your evening. Enjoy the rest of the celebration. Forgive the intrusion of family drama." I reached for my simple cloth purse hanging from the back of my chair. Before I could take a step, Aunt Ruth pushed her chair back with a loud, defiant scrape against the hardwood floor. "I've had quite enough of this cake," she declared, her voice like grinding gravel, cutting through the silence. She stood a little unsteady, but with immense dignity, and came to my side, looping her thin, strong arm firmly through mine. "The air in here has gone sour. I'll walk out with you, Connie." Together, without a single backward glance at the petrified tableau we left behind. Caroline standing stunned. David shrinking into his seat. Maya hiding her face. We walked a slow, deliberate path through the paralyzing silence past the gaping, motionless waitstaff, and out through the heavy oak doors into the cool, cleansing night air. The door of the grove swung shut behind us with a solid, muffled thud, immediately cutting off the chaotic, explosive buzz of whispered conversation that undoubtedly erupted the second we crossed the threshold. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a single tear. But with one composed, devastatingly clear sentence, I had taken back the deed to my own soul. The silence that descended in the days and weeks that followed was deeper, more absolute than any that had come before. It was the silence of a void. Caroline did not call. David did not send a conciliatory text. The constant low-grade hum of their planning, their suggestions, their encroachments, it all ceased. The polite siege was over, replaced by a cold war of total disengagement. The pain of it was a constant, heavy stone lodged in the center of my chest. But I recognized its nature now. It was a clean pain. It was the acute, grievous pain of a limb being cleanly amputated, not the infected, throbbing, feverish agony of the festering wound that had been there before. The next morning, with Aunt Ruth's steadfast presence, a strong cup of tea away, I began the quiet, systematic work of rebuilding my sovereignty. It was not dramatic. It was administrative. It was legal. It was profoundly personal. My first stop was a lawyer's office. Not someone from David's golf club or a firm Caroline might recommend. I found Eleanor Grant through a local women in business network online. She was around my age, with intelligent, kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of my best self. I paid her retainer from my own personal savings account, the one I had kept separate for decades, the one Caroline had never known about or asked about. With Eleanor, I drew up a new ironclad will. I created durable powers of attorney for both healthcare and finances. In clear, unambiguous language, I named Aunt Ruth as my sole agent and executor. Then Eleanor helped me draft a brief, formal, legally worded letter. It stated that all prior discussions, proposals, or implied agreements regarding the disposition of my property or person were null and void, that I had retained independent legal counsel, and that any future communications on these matters should be directed solely to her office. We sent it via certified mail to Caroline and David's home. The act of signing those papers, of feeling the pen glide over the lines, did not feel triumphant. It felt like building a levee against a flood that had already receded, but it was necessary, sobering work. It was my line in the sand, drawn not in emotion, but in permanent ink. Next, I made an appointment with a fee-only fiduciary financial planner named Susan. I brought every statement, every policy, every scrap of financial history I had. Susan, a warm woman with a gentle smile, spent an afternoon with me at her sunlit office. We went over everything: my social security projections, the lump sum from Michael's life insurance that I had invested conservatively in mutual funds 20 years ago, my modest teacher's pension, the paid-off house. She input numbers, ran projections, and then turned her computer screen toward me. "Connie," she said, her voice firm and reassuring, "let me be very clear. You are far from a burden. By most metrics, you are more financially secure than 70% of people your age. Your expenses are low. Your assets are solid. You could live in that house, maintaining it for the next 30 years if you choose, and still leave a meaningful legacy." The relief that washed over me was so profound it made me lightheaded. My instincts, my frugality, my quiet stewardship had been right. Their entire narrative of my precarious position had been a manipulative fiction designed to create a problem only their solution could solve. With that foundational fear dismantled, I was able to look at my home with new eyes. It was not a problem, a burden, or a static asset. It was my domain, my sanctuary. I called a local carpenter, a gentle, skilled man named Ben, who was known for respecting the bones of old houses. We drew up simple plans. I cashed in a small CD. Within a month, the neglected, drafty sunroom, the one with the beautiful southern light, was transformed into a proper, bright art studio. I bought cheap canvases, a basic set of acrylics, and a few decent brushes from the craft store. On a sheer whim, I signed up for a painting for absolute beginners class at the community center. The first night, under the kind guidance of our instructor, I made a messy, joyful, uncontrolled streak of cobalt blue across a blank white surface. I laughed out loud, a real, unguarded sound that startled me. It felt like an act of rebellion, a declaration of possibility. I began to slowly, tentatively reconnect with friends I had let drift away during the exhausting years of Caroline's ascendancy and my own retreat. I had lunches with women who asked, "How are you really?" and then waited silently for the true answer. I had weekly soup and sandwich dates with Aunt Ruth, who now regaled me with riotous, shocking stories of family land feuds and inheritance battles from 3 generations past, placing my own painful struggle in a much larger, almost comforting historical perspective. "Family isn't a prison you're born into, Connie," she said one blustery afternoon, dunking a crust of bread into her tomato bisque. "It's a country, and sometimes to keep your own soul, you have to defend your damn borders." In my painting class, I met Sylvia, a witty, irreverent widow, who had fought a similar, though less vicious, campaign with a condescending son-in-law. We became fast friends, bonding over our terrible attempts at perspective-sharing coffee and comparing notes on the quiet strength it takes to redefine your life after loss. Caroline's absence was a hollow-shaped space in my life. The phone did not ring on Sunday evenings. There were no more calendar invitations for birthday brunches or holiday gatherings. The pain of that loss was real, visceral, and I did not try to sugarcoat it or rush to get over it. I sat with it. But it was no longer poisoned, no longer mixed with the toxic fumes of disrespect, condescension, and manipulation. It was a sad, clear, empty space. And in that space, to my own surprise, I was slowly, tentatively beginning to cultivate something new, something that belonged only to me. The knock on my front door came on a bright, crisp Tuesday morning, several months into this new, quiet rhythm. I was in my sunroom studio, my hands pleasantly smudged with phthalo blue and sap green, attempting with more enthusiasm than skill to capture the chaotic, beautiful wildness of the ocean from a photograph I took years ago. The doorbell chimed an unfamiliar sound in my now peaceful, self-directed routine. Wiping my hands on a rag, I opened the door to find Maya standing on my porch. She looked utterly exhausted, a shell of her usual polished self. Her normally sleek hair was pulled into a haphazard bun wisps, escaping around her pale face. Dark, bruise-like circles shadowed her eyes. She held a simple paper bag from the local bakery. "Connie," she said, her voice small and ragged. Can I please come in for just a minute? I won't stay long." Wordlessly, I stepped aside, holding the door open. She walked into the foyer, her shoulders hunched as if against a cold wind. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where David had laid out his folder full of plans for my dissolution. I did not offer tea or coffee. She placed the bakery bag between us like a peace offering. "I brought danishes. You always liked the raspberry ones best." "I do," I said, my voice neutral. I waited. The quiet of the house pressed in around us. She took a shaky, deep breath and stared at her hands clenched in her lap, unable to meet my eyes. "I came without Caroline knowing. David definitely doesn't know. They think I'm at a client meeting." She twisted her fingers together. "I haven't been able to sleep. Not really, not since the restaurant. Not since everything." I remained silent, letting the space, the weight of her uninvited presence, compel her to fill it. "It was all about the money," she blurted out suddenly, the words tumbling fast, as if she had rehearsed them and was afraid she'd forget. "David, he got over his head in some speculative cryptocurrency trading group. A sure thing. He poured in a huge chunk of their joint savings, plus money he'd quietly borrowed against the equity in their condo. It was a pyramid scheme, basically. It collapsed in February. They were underwater, Connie. Deeply. They were panicking, hiding it from everyone. The talk about the summer house, the aggressive investments, it was all a smokescreen. They needed a large, immediate influx of cash just to stay afloat to avoid defaulting on the loan. Your house. It was the only significant unencumbered asset they felt they could access. She finally looked up, her eyes brimming with tears of shame and exhaustion. Caroline was terrified, and so ashamed. But instead of coming to you, instead of being horribly, humbly honest, she absorbed his panic and his language. She convinced herself it was for your good, for the family's future stability. If she could frame it as smart, forward-thinking planning, she wouldn't have to face the humiliating truth of what they'd actually done. My role, Maya's voice broke. My role was to make the plans look professional, legitimate, to be the objective third party that gave the whole thing credibility. I was so stupid, Connie. So arrogant. I thought I was helping my best friend navigate a tough but necessary family transition. I didn't see I was providing cover for her to financially bully her own mother. She wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. What she said to you at the restaurant, that was the script, completely shredding. That was her own shame, her terror, and her misplaced anger at being caught in a mess of their own, making all exploding outward at you. It was vile. It was unforgivable. And so was my part in it. I sold out the woman who was a second mother to me for a monthly consulting fee and the illusion of being in the inner circle. I listened as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a quiet, terrible thud. The truth settled into the room, cold and clear. It did not surprise me. It did not bring vindication. It simply explained the strange, desperate ferocity that had always lurked beneath the surface of their cold, clinical calculus. Their campaign had not been born of pure, unadulterated greed, but of fear, failure, and profound shame, all dressed up in the sharp suit of superiority and condescension. "Thank you for telling me, Maya," I said, my voice even weary. "It explains a great deal. The urgency, the aggression." "Are you going to forgive me?" she asked, a fragile, desperate sliver of hope in her raw voice. I considered the girl she had been laughing at this table over stacks of pancakes, and the woman she had chosen to become a hired strategist in a covert war against my autonomy. "I acknowledge your honesty today," I said carefully, measuring each word. "And I believe you are genuinely remorseful. But forgiveness, that isn't a transaction to be completed today. It's a long, uncertain path through a damaged landscape. And I don't know if our relationship, what's left of it, can ever find that path again, or if we'd even want to walk it together. You were family, and you chose to become a paid consultant in a hostile takeover of my life. Some fractures are too deep, too structural to plaster over and pretend they never were." She nodded slowly, absorbing the blow, knowing in her heart it was fair, perhaps even merciful in its clarity. She stood up, leaving the pastries untouched on the table. "I understand." At the door, she turned her hand on the knob. "She's miserable, Connie. Truly. And she's too proud and too trapped in the lie she helped build to even begin to admit why." "Pride," I said softly, looking past her to the maple tree in the yard, "is the most expensive currency in the world. And in the end, it buys you nothing but a very large, very empty house." After she left, I didn't move for a long time. Then I went back to my studio. I looked at my messy, imperfect, vibrant seascape. The lesson of this whole agonizing journey was not about winning an argument or losing a daughter. It was about the fundamental, non-negotiable concept of sovereignty. The moment a child confuses control for care, financial leverage for filial duty, is the moment the sacred bond twists into something transactional and corrosive. My power had never resided in the physical deed to the house. It resided in the metaphysical deed to myself. My choices, my voice, my consent. Respect isn't a trophy you are handed for surviving a certain number of years. It is the natural, life-sustaining atmosphere that exists between two people who genuinely recognize and honor each other's autonomy, boundaries, and personhood. I had to withdraw from a corrupted, non-consensual agreement to remember that I ever had the right to consent at all. My daughter may call one day. She may write a letter. She may show up on this porch as Maya did, or she may not. The wound of her absence, the ghost limb pain of a motherhood that has lost its object, is real, and it may never fully scar over. But for the first time in years, I am not waiting by the silent phone. I am not anxiously rehearsing conversations. I am here in the home I actively chose to keep listening to the cheerful argument of finches at the feeder, my hands stained with the colors of a vast, uncertain, breathtakingly beautiful ocean. The silence from my daughter is a deep and lasting sorrow I carry with me. But the voice in my own head, the one that guides my hand across this canvas, that chooses the colors, that decides when the painting is finished, or when it needs more work. That voice is clear, calm, unassailable, and completely, irrevocably my own. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild your entire sense of self and worth after a profound betrayal from someone you considered part of your foundation, I would truly value hearing about your experience. Tell me in the comments below, what was the specific moment you knew in your gut that the dynamic had to change no matter the cost? Your stories, your shared courage are what remind us. We are never truly alone in these battles. If you found a kernel of strength or recognition in my journey, please give this video a like. It lets me know these difficult, truthful conversations matter and have a place here. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about navigating the complex geography of family finding your voice when it's been silenced, and the quiet daily courage of building a life on your own terms. And if you think hearing this might help someone else you know who feels cornered, unheard, or disrespected, please share it with them. Thank you sincerely for listening, for being part of this community of reflection and resilience. However your own story unfolds from here, I wish you peace in your decisions, strength in your boundaries, and the unwavering, gentle clarity of your own true voice.